Welcome to Retirement Rescue Radio, a show specifically designed to help retirees and pre-retirees maximize their financial efficiency so you can live the retirement lifestyle you've always imagined. Your host is Nate Miller, investment advisor representative and author of the CPR Retirement Rescue Roadmap. Nate discusses thoughts and ideas from some of today's most knowledgeable professionals in the field of finance. He offers strategies along the way to help you make better financial decisions so you can maximize your retirement. This is Retirement Rescue Radio.
All right, hey there, everybody. Nate Miller here with Miller Retirement Group, and I've got one of my advisors, Matt Black, on the line with me. Matt, how you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, not too bad at all. It's a holiday season, so always a fun and busy time, and yeah, one of my favorite times of the year. So no complaints for me.
That's right. Thanksgiving's done. We're just biding our time until Christmas. We didn't put any lights up until after Thanksgiving was done. So I know I actually heard something a while back ago that was talking about, the people that start putting up Christmas lights at Halloween, right? And how they just didn't like that. And someone said, you know what? They're wanting to celebrate this, family and God and Christmas, all at once or whatever, that they like doing it for a long time. You know what? Let's let them do it. So it's right. Not a bad thing that they're celebrating. So I'm like, okay, that gives me a little bit better feelings around it. So for those of you who maybe don't know who Matt is our lead advisor for the Overland Park area. So he's heading up our Kansas City area branch. And I might be the owner of the company, but he's got more financial licenses than I do. It's like I heard somebody say one time, if you want to be successful, hire people that are smarter than you. So that's just what I did. And so he's here to talk about a few, I'm going to say misgivings or financial misconceptions, right? So we're going to be talking about financial misconceptions today, and he's going to kind of debunk some of those. And Matt, I think the first one we're going to, throw out at you right now is one that I hear a lot, especially when I'm in meetings with clients, is they'll tell me that they feel like they need $1 million in order to retire. And sometimes they have that and more, and sometimes they don't. So they feel bad. And so what's the answer there? Do we need $1 million to be able to retire?
Yeah, I love this one because I actually think this is the most common question that I get, that I have to explain why the question is maybe coming from an area of misinformation, because there's articles and there's tons of people out there who will post things along these lines. And so when people are kind of researching, have I seen enough? That's one of the first things that comes up is, well, you need $1 million. And then they go, oh, shoot, I don't have $1 million and I can't retire. Or on the flip side, I'm past $1 million. So great, I'm in perfect shape and I can retire whenever I want to now. And the reality is neither of those things could be true. They might, but it's not for the reasons that you think. And so whenever someone brings that up and says, again, I'm worried because I don't have $1 million, but I really want to retire, I always bring up an example of two separate clients that I worked with over the years, and their situations kind of talk about how that isn't the right perspective of looking at it. So on one side of the spectrum, I had a client of mine who was below $1 million. He had actually already retired, So what happened with him is he had a really great government job. And so he was getting a pension of, I believe it was about $8,000 a month, and it was indexed for inflation. And so it was going up every single year on top of his Social Security. That was about $3,000. And so he had about $11,000 coming in gross a month, and he was only spending roughly $3,000. And so every month he was actually adding all that money back to his portfolio and growing his balance in retirement versus having to worry about drawing it out and potentially, running out over time. Mm-hmm. So for him, he sat down and was thinking, I don't have $1 million. Should I have retired when I did? And the reality is he could have retired way earlier than that because he had so much extra guaranteed income from both Social Security and his pension that it really didn't matter. I don't know if he could have had a low enough number where I would have said, hey, you can't retire based off of what your plan looks like. And so for him, that he didn't need to be anywhere close to that. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I had a couple actually that I worked with, and they had well over $1 million. But when we were looking at their retirement goals, they had this list in the first 5 years of all these things they wanted to do, which included, they were going to buy a second home. They were going to take a trip to Europe every year with just the two of them, and then a domestic trip where they paid for all the kids and grandkids to all go somewhere together. And then there were small things like, they each bought new cars every couple years and just extra stuff on the side like that. Well, we ran through their plan, and despite being well over $1 million, it was in terrible shape. And I said, hey, you guys definitely cannot retire right now. And we need to start saving a lot more and working a lot longer, even though, again, you're well past that $1 million threshold or X times your salary that you might think that you need. And so I always remind people that, that number that you think you need to have in your head that maybe somebody else says you need to have is really meaningless. What it really comes down to is what your actual goals are in retirement and the resources that you have at your disposal, meaning what you've saved or what you'll have in income from things like pensions or Social Security to help fund those goals themselves. And so those numbers are totally different for everybody. And I have tons of clients who might not have $1 million, but have great looking plans. And then people who are over $1 million who aren't retired yet because they need to keep saving because of the spending goals that they have. So it's really more so a conversation of, again, what would you like to accomplish and what resources do you have to accomplish those? I always joke with people too that, if it was truly as easy as saying you need X number of dollars or X multiples of your salary by a certain age, I probably wouldn't have a job because there wouldn't be a need for financial planners if it was that simple. And so that's such a big part of what we do is figuring out all the things you want to accomplish and then how we can help you accomplish that based on the things you have at your disposal. So it's a much, much more complicated situation than just setting a number and retiring as soon as you hit it.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like similar to something I've mentioned to some of the clients when they'll ask that question too. And I'll tell them that, I've seen clients that have over $1 million that have bad plans. And I've seen clients that have $500,000 have a better plan than the $1 million one, and so like you were saying, it's all about the situation. It literally is dependent on what somebody's situation is. So, and that's good news for a lot of people.
That's part of what I like is they'll ask me that question in that first meeting and they're pleasantly surprised when they find out you actually need to worry about that number at all, or even better, once we get started in their plan and they start to look and see, hey, I might be in way better shape than I thought. All these numbers that I'm supposed to be hitting or whatever you would consider to be an average retirement saver is totally meaningless when it comes to your own actual plan. And so it's always nice to deliver that positive news to people when they think they're way behind, but they're actually perfectly on track.
Yeah, absolutely. Way more fun. All right, great. Okay, so we'll move on to the second question. I think that was a really good answer to the first one. Number 2, there's the common misconception. We've been told that when we retire, we're going to need about 80% of what we were spending before in order to have, live on in retirement. So we're under the assumption that our expenses are going to go down in retirement. So talk about that one, myth or truth?
Yeah, so that's what a lot of people think is, hey, when I retire, I'm not going to be working anymore, so I won't have to buy work clothes. I won't be going out to lunch during the day with my coworkers. I'm not going to be, driving to and from work and having to pay for gas. And so all these extra things are going to be off the table, and I'll probably be spending a lot more time at home so I can, cook my own meals. I don't have to buy extra clothes to be able to wear around the house and things like that. So because of all that, I should be spending a lot less than what I have to spend right now. And the reality is, we always tell people when they're getting ready to retire and we're predicting expenses is the best predictor of what you're going to spend in retirement is what you're spending right now. And that's what it actually ends up being, because while those things might go away, you have to remember the things that you're adding in. And a lot of times when someone retires, there's a list of things that they've been meaning to do. They just haven't had the time for. And that could be things that are somewhat small, like maybe you're going to start golfing a little bit more. Maybe you're going to start, pickleball is the new phase now that everybody's into. And so you might start doing things like that. Well, all those things require equipment that costs money. You have to have memberships to certain places that cost money as well. And then you're in the same situation where you're around other people again, just like your coworkers, where you're probably going out to lunch and doing other activities together. And then you have to factor in other things like taking those extra trips. So again, maybe it's taking a big cruise or taking that big trip to Europe that you've always been planning. Or I have a lot of clients who they want to buy an RV and drive around the country for a couple of years, right, when they retire. And so all these things that come up afterwards actually start to either have you spend as much as you were spending, or I have a lot of clients at the very beginning of retirement who spend more than what they were spending during their working years. And so again, it's back to what we talked about earlier, where it's setting goals of what would you like to do and accomplish when you retire? Because the reality is, if you're working 40 hours a week and you go down to not working at all, you're going to fill that 40 hours a week with something. And most of the time, it's not just sitting at home, which means you're going out and doing things that generally cost something. And so that's what we like to look at is, what are things you like to do? And obviously, depending on the activities and depending on the types of trips you take, those amounts can vary. But again, at the end of the day, what it ends up leading to is you're not actually keeping a bunch of extra money in your pocket from all of these things you're no longer doing. You're now filling that time with new things that also cost money.
Yep, exactly. I think I heard someone say that the expenses in retirement are more like a spending smile.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we start off, we're like you were saying, we're doing all these things. We're young at that point. All of our friends are the youngest that they're going to be. They're all still healthy. And so they can all do a lot more stuff. So yeah, when we retire, there is a good shot that our money, we actually might spend more at that point. So absolutely. And along those same lines as thinking our expenses are going to go down in retirement, a lot of people also think their tax rate is going to go down in retirement too. I mean, shoot, that's the whole reason that we were told to put money in 401ks or IRAs or any of those tax deferred retirement plans. We were told, put your money in because you'll get a deduction. You won't pay tax on the money that you contribute, and you won't pay any tax on the growth until we hit retirement and we start pulling that money out. And they tell us we're going to be in a lower tax rate so that we're going to pay less tax. So myth or truth?
Yeah. So this is probably the second most common thing that I have somebody tell me. The first one being do I need $1 million to retire? Because everybody will sit down with me. And when we first look at their plan, it's always, I have all this money that I've deferred for taxes. And you hear tax deferred and it just sounds like the greatest thing in the world. Why wouldn't I pay my taxes later versus having to pay them right now? That always sounds like a good deal. And what happens is we look at our plans, and again, your mindset's going to be, well, right now I'm working, so I have all my earned income. When I retire, I might still have Social Security, but it's a lot less than what I made while I was working. So that drop down in income that I have means that my tax rate should go down with it accordingly. And what we tend to find most of the time when we run through somebody's tax plan is that not only are their taxes not going down, we find that more situations where someone's taxes actually are going up in terms of their effective tax rate at that point in time in retirement. Because what a lot of folks forget is that every single year that you spend deferring any of the money that you're paying on taxes, a couple things are happening. That's one extra year of that money growing. So the balance that you have that was waiting to be taxed is getting larger and larger. And then you're saving it for a future date when you have to start taking it out, because your required minimum distributions, which now start at 73, are based off of what you have left in a tax deferred account. And so if you haven't taken anything out, it's just been sitting there growing and growing and growing, which again, in your head sounds like a good idea. But if we're dividing your life expectancy factor to calculate your required minimum distribution, we have to take a larger and larger balance out every time you continue to let it grow. And so what we tend to find is that when you take your required minimum distribution out, plus your Social Security, plus any other, whether it's pensions that you have, whether it's rental income that might be coming in, any other sources on top of that, we find that your effective tax rate at that point isn't actually decreasing. And so a lot of it comes down to, when is the right time to start taking money out? And it's like a lot of things in financial planning where it's not always all of this or all of that, meaning don't defer everything to the latest possible date or don't take everything out as soon as possible. It's about strategically looking at each of your tax brackets every year leading up to that age when you have to start drawing it out and saying, hey, are there certain amounts that I can take out beforehand so that that first year when I turn 73, I'm not just left with this massive tax bill because of how much my income's actually increasing. I mean, not only is it the tax rates that could go up, but you could also have Medicare premium increases if you're getting your spending to too high of a level. And when you hit your required minimum distribution time, again, that R in RMD stands for required. You're not allowed to not take that out. So if you see that that amount's going to put you over, you don't really have much else you can do at that point other than suffer the tax and Medicare premium consequences. And so that's the importance of looking ahead of time and seeing, hey, if I don't touch anything, if I do defer my taxes like I've been doing, what might that do in those age 73 and on years that I could maybe avoid by starting to take just a little bit out before that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's something that you do for all your clients there in Overland Park, is to find out if there is a better way so that we don't pay any extra tax if we don't have to pay. And it's interesting. So you're mentioning the required minimum distribution age, and if somebody doesn't do anything until then. So what we find is that the sweet spot to do a lot of the tax planning that we do usually comes from the time somebody retires to the time they have those required distributions. There's a lot we can do in those years for people, even though, like you mentioned, most of them don't end up in a lower tax bracket. But our goal is to try to get them down into that lower tax bracket. That's really what we're trying to do. Yeah. And along those same lines of, between retirement and the required minimum distribution age, when does retirement happen, right? So there's a lot of, and this will be another either misconception or, truth that we go here, is some people will think that they need to work until they plan on starting their Social Security. So if they want to take their Social Security at 65, they think they need to work till 65. If they're going to retire at 62, they think they have to take their Social Security at 62. So talk about that for a little bit. Myth or truth?
Yeah, this is one that I definitely say is a myth, because if you are saying that right when you stop working, you have to supplement that with some type of income, most of the time being Social Security, there's a good chance that you're missing out on potential opportunities to do what we just talked about, potentially lower your taxes over time and save yourself from big tax spikes in the future that you might be required to face. And so one of the most common examples that I would see of a situation like this is, you could have a married couple where, let's say, one spouse is older than the other, and the older spouse decides that they're going to be the one to retire first. That's typically what happens. And so that older spouse, when they retire, again, typically think, as soon as I retire, I take Social Security. But a lot of times we might find that if we just have the younger spouse's income, and then maybe we have a pension, or maybe we take small withdrawals from those retirement accounts, that might actually be enough to meet our income needs, at least for the time being. If that's the case, I always say one of the golden rules of tax planning is, let's not realize taxable income that we don't actually have to spend. If we don't have to spend it, let's figure out something else to do with it. And so in a situation like that, where their income needs are already being met, well, we could do something that you just kind of mentioned. If we wait and take your Social Security at a later date, that might have an opportunity to lower your tax rates a little more, since you don't have Social Security income, and maybe fill that extra gap with things like Roth conversions, meaning taking money out of your tax deferred accounts and moving them to a Roth before you hit age 73. What that obviously would do is then start to lower your required minimum distributions once those start at age 73. And again, you're doing it with tax rates that you now have advantage to take, because you're not adding in your Social Security income when you retire. You're truly just retiring, getting rid of your earned income, and not supplementing that with anything extra. So there's a big extra window there to take some tax money off the table ahead of time at a lower rate, versus taking it at a higher rate when by age 73, maybe both spouses are taking Social Security and both spouses do have to take their required minimum distribution. So I always mention that to people, whether it's retiring early and having a lower income, or maybe you get laid off from a job or leave a job early. Anytime your income drops in a certain year, that always means there's probably an opportunity to take advantage of something, because you're at a lower tax rate than what you thought you would be at. And so it's a reminder to, as you're planning ahead for retirement, think about, when I retire, what income will I actually have coming in, and do I need anything extra? If the answer is yes, we can look at lots of things like Social Security or IRA withdrawals, for example. If the answer is no, that means that we can save all that stuff and potentially take advantage of lower tax rates in the present to avoid higher tax rates in the future.
So if someone hasn't claimed Social Security yet, how do you help them figure that out?
So yeah, in terms of deciding when to take Social Security, there's a bunch of different factors. I mean, generally the things that people think of when it's taking Social Security is, what's my benefit? What's my spouse's benefit? And then how long do we think we're going to live for? Which nobody actually knows the answer to. And so those things are helpful, knowing exactly, what your life expectancy could be. If you're going to take maybe half of your spouse's benefit, or maybe take your whole benefit, those things do matter. But a lot of it, again, comes back to, what we've been talking about really this whole time is, what are your actual goals? What do you want to accomplish when you retire? And what resources do you have at your disposal to do that? Because if you are someone who's going to retire and you have those extra income sources, let's say you do have a good sized pension, let's say you have done a really good job saving, and you can take a small percentage out of your portfolio every year to be able to meet your income needs. Well, that might be a reason to not touch your Social Security right away, because it's not income you need. And again, if you don't need it, there's no reason to just realize it as income and have to pay taxes on it. So that's really what it comes down to mostly, is saying, when I retire and don't have that earned income, how am I going to do all of the things that I want to do? And then we have to decide, is Social Security an option to help meet that? Or is delaying it and getting the increased benefit in the future a better option, and then drawing from your portfolio? So a lot of that comes down to, again, how much you saved, how much could we realistically withdraw from your portfolio to meet your needs? And is that amount that we're drawing right now going to potentially put you in a bad position in the future? Because, I have some clients who have heard waiting on Social Security is the best thing to do, and you have to do it. But then we look at their plan and say, hey, if you wait and you take these couple years drawing these big chunks out of your portfolio instead of taking Social Security, you might not have enough left by the time you file for Social Security to get yourself to retirement. And the reminder I give to people too is, if you get your Social Security and you spend every check throughout the year, guess what's going to happen January of the next year? You're going to get another check from Social Security. That money is going to keep coming in. But if you delay it too long and you just spend down your portfolio to try and get a higher amount in the future, well, nobody's going in there and putting money back in your portfolio. So you have to pay a lot of attention to what you're drawing and when you're drawing it. And then, of course, you have the whole aspect of the market and what it could make or lose in those years that you withdraw it, which makes the situation all the more complicated. But that's really the biggest thing, is what do you need to withdraw every year? And can we do that in a realistic manner or not?
Got it. So everybody's situation is going to be different. All right. And so along those same lines of needing to, thinking they need to wait until claiming Social Security, I've heard other people, and this is definitely true at some of the local companies that have like Cadillac health plans. They don't want to retire until 65 because that's when Medicare kicks in, and they don't want to have to go out and buy the health insurance on the market. And so talk about that. Does someone have to wait until 65 to get Medicare before they can finally retire?
Yeah, so that's probably the most common age that I see folks come in and say, hey, this is the date that I've targeted as when I want to retire, because they want to make sure that they have their health costs covered. And so there's a lot of different factors that go into that. Again, the number one thing it's going to come back to, I'll be repeating this quite a bit, is what are your goals when you retire?
Bang that drum.
And what resources do you have to accomplish them? And, I know most of my clients probably get sick of that because I answer almost every question that way. But that's the reality of the situation, is that if you're looking at your plan and you say, hey, I don't have the funds to cover these extra healthcare costs, well, that could potentially be a reason why we have to wait until 65 if you don't have additional income and resources to be able to do that. But I have a lot of folks who are able to retire early for various reasons, such as if it's a married couple and your spouse is still working and you're on their health plan. I mean, that's a great reason why you can retire and not have to worry about any increased health costs. That's probably the most common version of it. And then if you're someone who isn't going to be able to be covered by your spouse's plan, again, it becomes a matter of what is the actual cost of this? And then what is the trade-off of me working a couple extra years to that date? Because when I look at someone's plan, what I always tell them is, every year that we have you work longer, your plan is going to look better. But that also doesn't mean you just need to keep working longer and longer and longer, because at some point you have to press a button and say, hey, I know I could work a year extra and save more and have a better looking plan with more money at the end than what I have now. But at a certain point, the risk you're running is not having enough time left in retirement to do the things that you want to do. And so if we can look at someone's plan and say, hey, maybe you're 62 and you're 3 years away, but those 3 years of covering medical costs prior to Medicare can easily be met from what you're drawing from your portfolio, what you're maybe getting from your pension. Again, if you have a spouse who's still working, if that gets added into there, if we have the ability to cover those types of things, then like I said, it's a lot of a question of trade-offs of, would you rather have these 3 extra years to live the life that you want to live in retirement because you can afford to do so? Or would you rather work these 3 extra years and not have those 3 extra years of retirement anymore? So again, looking at what you want to accomplish, what your goals are, and what resources you have at your disposal, that's how we determine whether or not it makes sense. But if you have the resources to do it, then you absolutely can retire before age 65. And once you hit age 65, guess what? You can still take Medicare and you can still go back to having the same plan you thought you'd have if you waited until 65 anyways. So it's a luxury to have if you can do it, but it's absolutely something that can be done. It's not a set date that everybody has to wait for.
Absolutely. This would be very similar to what a mentor of mine said at one point. He said, if you have a problem, and in this case, the problem would be defined as waiting till 65 because you want to make sure Medicare is in place because you don't want to spend too much on the health insurance. So if you have a problem that money can solve and you have the money to do it, you no longer have a problem. And so the answer to that, could just be as if you have the money to buy health insurance before 65, then you don't have to wait until 65 to retire. So love that. Let's see. All right. Those are great answers. I think we'll go for a couple of them here that maybe not as many people, like it's not going to be definitely as prevalent as the $1 million question or, waiting till 65 or anything like that. But I think they're really important. And some people probably still have these questions in their mind. And one of them was, you can't afford to risk any of your money in the market once you retire. What are your thoughts on that? Myth or fact?
Yeah. So whenever I get something like this, I actually kind of like these questions because there's a lot of advice if you, again, are just Googling an answer or watching a YouTube video about retirement or financial planning. Someone's going to say something's always good or always bad. And almost every time that's a red flag that person is not actually giving you true advice. Because what I tell everybody about this whole industry and planning for your retirement is that very rarely is something good for everybody or bad for everybody. And so a lot of times it's something where maybe certain individuals don't need it or certain individuals do, or maybe certain individuals need it in certain amounts. And so risk in the market or not risk in the market's an example of that, to where some people ask me, can I afford to have a risk? Or some people who say, I just want to have everything at risk. And why would I need to protect any of my money because the market's done so well for me? And almost every time, neither of those answers are right. Again, this really what it comes down to is a balance, because it is true that, when we're in our working years, I always kind of remind people of this. When we're 30 years old and you're looking at putting your money into your 401k plan, what you're really doing is just saying, I'm going to put this money in here, and my goal is for it to be the largest possible amount that it can be by the time I retire. I don't really care what's happening while it gets there. It can bounce up and down as much as it wants, as long as it is as large as possible when I retire and start to need it. That's pretty simple. What happens as we get closer to or into retirement is we still want to see it be a bigger balance in the future. Of course, we want to see it grow a little bit, but we actually do care about what's happening in between now and then. So it's not as simple as just saying, set it and forget it and don't take a look at it, because now we need it. When we were 30, we didn't need it for such a long time. And so now we have to sort of revise what our expectations are of our portfolio and what our goals are, because again, we're in a different place in our lives, which means our money needs to be in a different place as well. It wouldn't make any sense to invest like a 30-year-old when you're 65 years old. And so when you get to that point, when you're getting ready to retire, you have to ask yourself, again, when you're thinking about, can I afford to risk any of my money in the market? We go back to the same thing we've been talking about, or what are the goals you actually want to accomplish? And whether that's, again, being able to take trips, whether that's being able to help your kids and grandkids pay for college, whether that's leaving money behind for them to potentially buy homes one day or get married one day, all these different things that you want to do, these are all things that are occurring in future dates. They're not happening right now. And we know that over time, if we want to invest for the future, best way to do that is to invest in the market. But then on the flip side, we also know we can't have everything in the market, because as we've talked about with using the resources at your disposal, if you use your resources like your investments and then you have a bad year in the market, you have to remember that you're drawing both your assets that you use to spend out of your portfolio and the losses that the market had out of your portfolio. So you're kind of doubling down on how much your assets are actually losing that year. So really what it comes down to is a balance of saying, how much risk can I afford to take? And the answer to that question is going to be, it depends, because everybody's situation is a little bit different from one another.
Banging that drum.
Yep, exactly. And so, I know it's a thing, clients of mine, they kind of laugh every time they hear it because they're looking for a yes or no answer. And there really aren't many in financial planning. It is, what does your plan actually need? And for some individuals, they might have a bunch of goals that are really far in the future. And, I've got some clients who all of their retirement assets are going to be used to eventually be passed on to their kids and grandkids. Well, that's great. That means that they probably have a little bit more risk exposure available to them than someone who's saying, hey, I need to use this right now. And besides my Social Security, this is the only other form of income that I have. Well, that person needs to take a totally different approach to their risk profile than the person who says, hey, I'm not touching this in my lifetime. It's just going to be sitting one day for someone else to spend. And so it goes back to, again, setting goals of, when are we going to spend this? How are we going to spend this? And who is going to spend this? And once we figure all those different things out, we can start to say, this is the level that might make sense for you. So it's a combination of still having that risk in the market to get a good return over time, but understanding that we don't have 30 years to generally sit and just let it come back from any market downturn. So we need to adjust how much of that actual market exposure we have at that point.
All right. Well, I think we'll go with one more question, I think, that we've got time for. And this one, I'm going to ask about the 4% rule. And so some people might not know what the 4% rule is. So first off, I would like you to explain what the 4% rule is. And then the second would be, they think that that is what they have to take out, or they can't take out anymore, or they have to take out that or less. So I talk a little bit about that 4% rule.
Sure. Yeah, the 4% rule, and you can correct me if you know the answer to this. I believe it's been around for about 3 decades or so. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, because I think it was 94, I think, when William Bengen came up with that. So yeah, it's been almost 2 decades.
I was going to ask you if you remembered the name so I could credit him, and you did as well. So I appreciate that, because I didn't remember that either. But yeah, so it's again been around for about 3 decades or so. And really what it's intended to do is establish a safe withdrawal rate in retirement. Because as we've talked about so far, the problem with pulling assets from your retirement portfolio is you don't know what the market's doing at the time that you're pulling it. And if the market's going down while you're drawing money out, your portfolio is losing money from both of those things at the exact same time. And so this rule was really invented to, hey, if you can stay around a 4% withdrawal rate based on what we know about the rate of return in the market over time, that should allow you to avoid ever actually running out of money, given that the market's going to, again, over a long period of time, return a higher average than 4%. And so if you can stay at that or below that, then you shouldn't have as big of a worry of running out of money at that point in time. And so for decades, that's what a lot of folks have done with their portfolios. They've mapped out year one of retirement and said, hey, I'm spending X number of dollars a year. Is that 4% or less in my total portfolio? If it is, I can retire. If it's not, I need to keep working. And I do get that quite a bit, actually, of folks coming in and saying, hey, I know I'm at 4%, so I think I should be okay. And there's a couple things to consider here, because I actually do think the 4% rule is a good starting place. If you take a look at your plan real fast and you notice that your first year, you're going to need to be withdrawing 8, 9, 10%, that probably means that there's some things we need to adjust. So, and then on the flip side of that, if you're withdrawing 1%, that means that you probably are in a good position and you're not overspending based on what you've saved. However, to decide what the appropriate withdrawal rate for you is, and even if you are at 4%, is there still a chance you could run out of money? The answer to that could be yes.
Bang that drum again.
Yeah, again, right, because everybody's situation is different, and there's a couple other things that go with that, because I think the biggest issue I find with the 4% rule is people look at it just like I said. They look at, what am I going to spend when I retire, and is it 4% or more, or 4% or less? And what you need to look at is, what's my withdrawal rate going to be every year of retirement? And so a good example of that is, again, let's say you think you're taking 4% out of your portfolio, but then we do have a big market downturn and we lose a big chunk of our portfolio to that. Well, the next year, if we want to draw that same dollar amount out again, it's not going to be 4% of our portfolio anymore. So now when we sit back down and update our plan, we're basing the whole thing on a totally different withdrawal rate. And it's why we spend so much time looking at different sequences of returns in the market to say, hey, if maybe you are needing to withdraw exactly 4% of your current balance right now. But what if you are in a situation like that where you just happen to retire at the wrong time and the market goes down in that first year? If you have to withdraw 6 or 7% that next year, could you still sustain that for a given period and not worry about running out? So again, it comes back to the question we talked about before of, can I have risk in the market? Well, the people who have risk at the market, that 4% rule is going to be harder to give a yes or no answer to whether or not that makes sense for you, because it depends on what the market's doing in that early period of time. And so that 4% rule to me encapsulates a lot of your investment plan in retirement, because it reminds you that you need to think of, how much is my portfolio moving year in and year out? How much am I withdrawing every single year? And how long do I think I'm going to be doing that for? And then if there's times where that balance declines and my portfolio is being drawn down with it, can I still sustain making those same types of withdrawals going forward and continue to not have to worry about running out of money? So I always remind people that even if we look at your plan and we are at a 3 or 4% withdrawal rate, so it looks like we're in good shape, that does not mean that we can just continue to do that without ever looking or changing anything. It means that every year we need to revisit it and say, hey, am I still drawing 4%? Can I still afford to draw 4%? Or maybe I need to draw even less. And then hopefully over time, the answer becomes, well, maybe I can draw even more than that. But to me, again, I think that's the biggest mistake that I see, is just looking at, what's my year one withdrawal, and is it 4%? And whether or not it is determines whether I can retire. It's, what is that expected withdrawal rate going to be over a 30-year span from, say, 65 to 95? And is that withdrawal rate sustainable? I think that's probably the better question to ask.
Yeah. So instead of calling it the 4% rule, maybe we should call it just the 4% rule of thumb.
Yeah,
I think anytime something tries calling itself a rule when it comes to investing, is just that. It is a rule of thumb, not a hard and fast rule that somebody needs to follow. And you're absolutely right. I think it does give some people at least a little bit of guidance on if they're anywhere close to possibly being able to retire without even, fully doing a whole plan. So yeah, good deal. All right. So hopefully for a lot of you that have been listening, if you had some of those same questions that Matt had, I hope that clears some of them up, or at least lets you know that your situation might be different than your buddy's situation. And so if they're telling you what they did, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you have to do. You probably should sit down with somebody like Matt, go through your own plan that can be catered to you specifically in your financial situation, or you and your spouse if you're part of a couple. And so that drum that Matt kept banging right there of, it is literally dependent on your situation, we can figure that out for you. And you don't have to worry about or wonder about whether or not you can do the same as your friend that was talking about their situation or whatever it was. So yeah, definitely. Let's see here. Matt, any closing pieces of advice or wisdom before we go here? I think we're about running out of time here. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll just kind of reiterate what you've said, which is the same things I've been mentioning the whole time, is that, whatever ideas you have in your head about where you think you might stand right now, or how you compare to somebody else, or anything along those lines of general guidance or general principles that you've sort of read or found over the years, the reality is, as we talked about with things like the 4% rule, they're really just rules of thumbs to start to steer you in the right direction. They don't actually tell you if you're on track or if you're doing the right things you need to be doing. And so, to me, I think such a big part of my job is hopefully helping to put people in better positions than they are today. And a lot of that comes from looking at things that people think they're supposed to be doing or think they should have that, depending on their situation, they might not need, or they might need a different kind of. And so, my advice to anyone would just be, if there's something you're looking at in your plan or something that you're seeing as you look towards retirement that you don't feel 100% sure about, or you don't know if you even know the right questions to ask, well, that's why we're here. And so, our whole idea is to put together a plan where you can look ahead into the future and start to answer some of those questions of, have I lowered my taxes in the future the right amount? Am I withdrawing percentages? I mean, everything that we've talked about today are questions that we answer whether someone asked them or not when we put their plan together. And and that's the reason that we do it, is we know what those questions are going to be before they even come up generally. And we already have a plan that we can put in place to get most of those answered. So
our plans will answer questions you don't even have yet.
Having an actual plan, there's a lot of value in having something that you can look at and say, hey, here's what I'm going to be doing from now through retirement.
Yep. And so, if you have questions, if you're like, Matt, all your answers to these questions were great, but can you help out my specific situation? The answer is yes, he can. So if you're in the Kansas City area, you've got those questions, reach out to Matt. We'll have a link to his calendar. So where if you want to schedule a 15-minute phone call, you can do that. If you got 250,000, 2.5 million, 25 million, whatever it is, and you might have some of those questions that we talked about today, reach out. And that's really all we do in that first visit, is get some of those questions answered. We never take clients on first visits. He doesn't charge for those first visits. So reach out. Let's get those questions answered. Let's give you more confidence about your retirement. So all those things that we talked about wanting to do when you finally do retire, you can do them with the confidence that you don't have to worry about running out by doing them. So Matt, appreciate all that wealth of knowledge. And so you guys can see why I hired somebody with more licenses than I did, because he hits things a little differently than I do and has a little bit of a different perspective. And so that can talk to somebody a little bit differently than what I do. And so, that was great. And we're going to have Christmas coming up here pretty soon. So everybody definitely safe travels for all of that. Enjoy your time with the family, and we'll look forward to a great new year. All right. And again, Matt, thanks for coming on. We'll probably bring Matt on several times in the future as well for different topics, just to get his insight as well, because this is a Retirement Rescue Radio, and we're always trying to empower you to live the retirement you deserve.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Look forward to coming on again.
You bet. All right. Take care, everybody.